So I'm enjoying second seed breakfasts, and I wanted to take this opportunity to respond to some questions. So here we go, rapid fire.
And I'm pretty certain the seeds at the store aren't open pollinated, so it's iffy at best whether or not they produce well.
So there's some truth in there, but let's dissect what we're talking about. The seeds that you buy in the store, it depends. And that's why you really got to read the label. We say the most important skill in survival skills and homesteading is reading. We can learn from the mistakes of others, or we can make our own mistakes, and those oftentimes are incredibly costly. But if we read the seed packet and look for hybrid, that's going to be the clue to whether the seeds will propagate and go on to raise a tasty vegetable. So the hybrid seeds, because it's two seeds pollinated together, creates this like third new being. Better Boy hybrid is a great example that people love in the garden. It comes from two different tomatoes that when they're crossbred, you have a seed that produces. But because the way that genetics work, that Better Boy, when you cross-pollinate it with another Better Boy, you have the branches of the Punnett square, the genetics table, that may or may not give you a Better Boy. And I think it's what, like a 1 in 8 chance that you get that exact Better Boy. And that goes into like dominant and recessive genes. There's a chance, but a lot of your time and effort is going to be wasted in trying to plant that seed. So we look for heirloom variety seeds. That's what we should be buying in the store when they have sales, when they're when they come across our path, when it's something that we want to try growing. We can also get seeds from like other people's garden. And this is what like the community building is so important about. And it goes back to like propagation. When you see a plant in the wild that you want to have more of, you harvest those seeds, save them, plant them in a place that you like. Same thing in the community. Like if someone is selling vegetables that are heirloom organic, we can save those seeds and we don't have to buy the seeds. So you're correct. There's a lot of truth there, but I think you need to really hone in and focus on the words that are on the seed packets that you're buying. So we're looking for the keywords are heirloom, organic seeds. And those will most of the time, overwhelmingly, be true to their seed. Sometimes you get some weirdness in there, but it's enough to bank on. I think they guarantee those seed packets are like 99.9% exactly going to be what you want, and they're going to grow when you plant them. Yeah, or in your garden, if you're just growing them and propagating seeds, you don't have to go buy seeds. That's why we want the heirloom organic. So the first time that we plant them, we can start that cycle of saving seeds, planting them the next year, or just letting them go to seed, maybe not harvesting them all, and just letting it kind of propagate the garden. And that's when we have volunteers come up. We've showed those on videos before. But we can get volunteer plantings. We can do like intentional plantings, starting them in the greenhouse and then moving them out. Or we can just plant them in the soil. It all depends. But heirloom organic, that's what we're looking for in our garden. Now, it might not be what you're used to buying in the stores, but you'll find that they're really, really tasty, really, really awesome, and worth your time to grow them in the garden.
Scott, this next one, they asked, what are contour lines in a garden?
Contour lines are really cool, and they mark a level line. If you see like the topographical maps, or the maps with like a bunch of like squiggles on it, those are the contour lines. And they mark out level paths. We've actually made a video on this, and that gets really deep into contour lines. But they're important because they help in either storing water in the soil by stopping it, letting it find a level, sinking it into the ground where it can be stored and not evaporated off, or they're good to help control erosion in ways that like in places that we want it. So water is going to find its level. It goes down to the lowest elevation. We can harvest it using contour lines. That's why they're important.
This person said, you can direct the shape of your strawberry patch, move the daughter in the direction you wish to fill, place a pebble on top to keep it there, and it will send down roots.
Yeah, cool, definitely. We do the same thing with squash and melons and like pretty much all like vining sort of things. You can kind of control the direction. That's how we keep them in pathways. And I really like that method. And when we build intentional landscapes, it's important to say like, oh, this area is like for whatever crop we want. This crop is better suited for, and you can like dial in the pH for like different areas, and you don't have to like broadacre, apply lime to dial in the pH. You can have like little sections that are better for different things, and controlling what you want to grow in that direction. That's how you do it. And that's the same technique as like propagating. It's like we're taking seeds, putting them in this place because that's where we want them to grow, because that's what the plant is going to like. Yeah, I'm totally for that. Just keep in mind, like for us, like the hardest thing about growing strawberries is when we grow them, that the squirrels want to come in and take them. So you got to be quick. I guess that's like with produce, all produce, you know, blueberries and birds love that. The blackberries, raspberries, you know, we're fighting the birds all the time. Everything likes the tastiest food, and if you're growing it, it's going to come get it. But yeah, like overplant, propagate. We really like to plant our strawberries and asparagus together to get that like stacking of functions, that like permaculture, you know, guild system together. The strawberries kind of cover the ground. They're a wonderful ground cover. If you're wondering like, how do I cover this pathway with something like clover? I need to keep the weed pressure down, the grass pressure down. Maybe strawberries are the answer for you. We like them, but that's how you can direct the growing of materials. So you're right on there. Great point.
Bro, I don't know what homesteading is. Can you explain?
Yeah, it's a whole, I could show you better than I can tell you, right? So homesteading, I think for me, is the reversion to what people have been doing for thousands of years. Living close to nature, living in the food systems, and caretaking the earth to be better for future generations. Now, I can tell you also what it's not. And it's not working a soul-sucking 9 to 5 for somebody that doesn't care about you. It's definitely not farming, because we're not growing one crop for acres and acres and acres and dreading time in the tractor seat. What it really is for me is becoming the master of your own destiny and taking your life and the people that you care about lives into your own hands and saying, hey, we're going to be doing better tomorrow than we are today. And that comes through hard work, dedication, and proper planning. You know, you can kind of like go around the landscape and just like kick rocks around, or you can plan out the things that are going to be successful, whether that's business, school, any facet of your life can come back to the skills that homesteading and the survival skills teach us. And it's because these skills are so intertwined with our personal being. Everybody, you go back far enough in your ancestry, everybody was a homesteader because it was super important. That's how we got to where we are today in this like technological, you know, matrix grid. And we're kind of trying to opt out of that by at the same time playing a crucial role for the people that aren't as lucky as us to have access to land and be able to work it and to cultivate the lives that we enjoy. So I hope that answers your question.
Scott, you can provide veg for a family of 4 on only 500 square feet of garden. How can they do that?
Yeah, so I guess the biggest thing is you need to take, in proper planning, everything comes back to proper planning, but we need to think about like what those people enjoy eating. There's no sense wasting any of that space on things that we're not going to eat. So we break it up by seasons, by what we eat, and also like height. So we don't have to grow everything. We can get that like vertical farming effect by growing corn and squash and beans together. That's the famous Iroquois Three Sisters. We can grow our pathways with like strawberries, as we mentioned like earlier in this video, or like having living mulch pathways with clover, vetch. Those are the ones that we use most frequently, is the clovers, wildflower mixes, because the white clover, that'll feed the bees. So we have this like synergistic design we're not just going in, plowing it, planting the row crop and having like empty rows. We want to plan with the most amount of space being utilized. So again, we have like the high layer, and that goes back to like the 7 layers of a forest system. We have the canopy, the lesser canopy, the herbaceous layer, the mycorrhizal, like the mushrooms. A lot of people forget that stuff. We can be growing those using that inside our garden. So these like 7 layers that we can bring into our garden planning so that we get the most effectiveness out of that 500 square feet. But it's absolutely, you can thrive on having that. And that's why we spend so much time with like suburban and like city permaculture designs too, is because it really doesn't take that much land. If you have access to dirt, there's no reason why you shouldn't be getting some produce out of it. So I've said it plenty of times, like if you have access to dirt, then you have access to produce, and it can feel overwhelming. But it all comes back to proper planning and thinking about and reading. You know, that's why we've come up with these free resources, our Spring Garden Prep Guide, our Ultimate Chicken Mastery. There's a bunch of them at sustainablehomestead.com. Pick and choose from and see what's important to me at the moment and then go from there. But it all comes back to proper planning. Take advantage of these free resources and reach out if we can help answer any of your questions. That's what we're here for, to make it easier, more efficient, for more abundance for you. Because it's not good enough for us to be successful. You have to be successful as well. That's why we're here at sustainablehomestead.com. Yeah, no, that's a great system. We've got a lot of benefit from doing that. A lot of times we'll start plants in the greenhouse, move them out into the companion planting design, which it sounds like you're talking about in polycultures. We move them out into the rows and then come back with like a loose straw mulch, put those around them, and it does the same thing. Ultimately, something's going to grow up through that straw mulch, though, and that's when we really employ chop and drop to the fullest extent. Come through, chop it, throw it back on top, and we're building that those structures of organic matter that really make the garden thrive.
We raised chickens, lived on 20 acres in Florida. My nephew and his girlfriend decided to board horses. No barn, no feed room. They didn't have any fencing for horses beforehand. One died. They would come over to my yard for water. It was horrible. Everyone knew it was a bad idea, but I guess they got what they wanted.
Yeah, no, I believe that. This is like one of, a bunch of stories that I've heard. You're not the only one, if that's any consolation. But it's so important to have proper planning before you get animals, have your infrastructure in place. It's really hard to build the infrastructure while you're dealing with all that. So get it in place first. I know it's costly and you don't really have the cash flow of having the animals, but it's what you got to do. You got to build the fence, you got to put the waterers in, you got to make sure they have an area that keeps them safe. Without that, you're just doomed to fail. This is also like why I caution people to get the infrastructure before you get the animals. They don't really understand the whole cost and what can go wrong. If the animal dies, you're out that animal. Even worse, if it gets out and gets into traffic, you might be liable for that too. If it gets out, starts eating your neighbor's field, it's just a whole host of things. Or even worse, it's bred by some animal that doesn't have a good genetic background. Now you're dealing with that for multiple of years and maybe for your entire homesteading career. And there's really no way out of it. And that happened because you didn't have the right infrastructure. The horse got out, got bred by bred by a donkey, and then now you're dealing with mules the whole time.
These thoughts ought to be behind every type of food production. This is how everything healthy is made. Nothing good comes from factory-made food products. Food needs to come from farms.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree with that, obviously. My biggest gripe with farming, or the word farm, is that it's kind of been co-opted by the factory model. Sure, anything that's grown that we eat comes from a farm, but that farm has been so separated from the people that it serves. It's easy to get sold things when you're walking through the grocery store. It's just the brightest packaging. If we think about that model, it's not going anywhere, right? It's certainly not going anywhere if we don't put effort into building the systems that take care of us. It's only in recent times that system has even worked. For 5,000 plus years, people were close to their system. So to reclaim that sovereignty, it's gonna be hard, it's gonna be a journey. If you have the proper planning, that journey is a whole lot easier. That's why we put out so much content, so much educational material to help you get to the abundance level faster, more efficiently, and not with wasted money, because we don't have time and we don't have money to waste to kind of reclaim our sovereignty and get back to the landscape. We're not doing what our ancestors have done. Of course, we can rely on technology to build the system, but over time, that technology just kind of fades into the background as we become more in touch with our food system and away from that factory model. Would we be spending so much if we were spending a little bit more money on the food that we grew and we consumed? I don't think so. This is the model that we're a proponent of, and this is the model that we're hoping to spread, and we are spreading throughout ourselves, our community, and our families.
Are there any volunteer plants you shouldn't grow together? Are there any plants I should not put in my compost pile?
Okay, so that's a great question. It's two parts. Are there any volunteers that you should not grow together? I would say that if a volunteer is growing, it probably is okay. Because for that volunteer to grow, it has to be the right soil conditions. Now, it might not be the best. We just planted a bunch of garlic, and this is probably the most important one to remember, is that garlic and onions really don't like beans. That's the kind of the only one that is like really, really important to know. When you plant your garlic, you don't want to plant your beans right on top of there. And additionally, we don't want to be planting the same crop over and over again. Tomatoes particularly will build like a copper deficiency if you routinely plant them in the same. So we want to rotate our crops. As far as what plants do we not want to put into the compost bin, that doesn't matter so much. We want our greens and browns in kind of equal distribution. And if we put those together, everything rots and it becomes soil. Now there is, like, if you're using horse compost, right? If you're using the straw, the horse's gut doesn't get good enough or doesn't get hot enough to kind of cook out the seeds that's in, and you'll get like just plants that you don't want potentially to come up if you use horse compost or as like a mulch in your garden, right? So maybe stick clear of that. But as far as what can't go into your compost pit, if we're using a compost pit like the one we have outside of our house, it's pretty much whatever you want. Put it in there, rotate it. The oxygen gets the temperature up, and you'll have really healthy, weed-free soil from that compost pit. Yeah, we've actually done a video on that. Check out our composting series where we built this really cheap composter with just a couple pallets. I don't know if you can see it behind me, but we use that all the time. We take the scraps from the kitchen, throw it in there. A lot of the stuff we'll feed to the chickens before it gets into the compost, so we're getting the most out of that. As far as feeding stuff to chickens, you don't really want a lot of citrus in there. Anything other than that, like you're good to go.
I feed my hens a bunch of chicken scraps. They love eating onions, garlic, and all the scraps from carrots. And feed them things like rice and meat so they don't get eaten. Fact of the matter is, chickens are scavengers. They will eat anything. The only thing you can't give them is raw beans and apple seeds, because they contain a poison.
Okay, cool. Sweet. I'm with that. Yeah, I love feeding chickens whatever comes out of the kitchen for the most part. Citrus is kind of bad for them. But what I found is when you have them in a free range environment, they're going to eat what they want to eat. Sure, the arsenic and the apple seed, but by the time they've gotten to the apple seed, they've already found something else that they want to chew on and they want to eat. They're looking for the highest quality stuff that they can be eaten. So maybe it's the outside of the apple, but there's spring onions in the garden. Sometimes I've heard, people say, oh, maybe don't feed them onions. But it's the same with cows, and why rotational grazing works is because they come back and they're going to want to eat the most tasty stuff for them, and that's the new growth. So if we fence them out of that, move them to another area, they're forced to eat the other stuff. I think rotational grazing is the way to do it, and it relates to this in chickens because they're just going to go out and whatever is available in the landscape is what there's going to be eaten. If it's acorns that are falling down, they're eaten seasonally, they're eating what's available, and it's the highest quality because it's what's ripe at the time. I try not to overthink it.
Essentially, they won't eat big chunks of stuff. They need it cut up for them. What is your thought on that?
I mean, yeah, I like my food cut up for me too. I like my peanut butter sandwiches cut diagonally. But at the end of the day, I'm going to be eating that peanut butter and jelly sandwich regardless of how it's presented to me. Crust on or off, I'm game,
Chickens are the same way?
Yeah, I think chickens are the same way. I think there is something to be said for cutting it up. But even if you let it rot, right? What comes as things start rotting? We have worms that I know chickens love to eat. We have flies and fly larvae that I know chicken loves to eat. So if you throw it out there, I mean, if you want to spend the time cutting it up and putting it in a food processor, good for you. Give yourself a pat on the back. That's more effort that I would want to put in. But whatever makes you happy, that's the right answer. But I found that if whatever I throw to chickens, they might not eat it the first day, they might not eat it the second day, but it's gone before it gets too rotted. This was really fun. I hope you got something from that and we answered some of the questions and comments and concerns that are left in the comment section of every video. We have a lot of free resources available. The Spring Garden Prep Guide, the Pasture Rover, our mobile chicken coop build, and our Chicken Mastery course that's been really popular with all the tips and tricks that we've learned over years of doing this. If you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the comment section below and we'll take those as part of our monthly webinar. This is where people jump on, we talk, we have in-depth discussions about topics, and can hopefully answer those in-depth questions that are more suited for the nuances of a webinar than just responding to your questions here. Put those questions in the comment section, sign up for our newsletter. That way you know when we're going live and you never miss a beat. Thanks for watching. We're sustainablehomestead.com.